Welcome to Vampire the Masquerade Redemption Reawakened Pre-Alpha starring the seductive Kristoff. This will be a fairly different video, giving an account of my experiences with the playtest the dev kindly provided me with of their mod so far, and generally getting a feel for its progression. It should be apparent that it's still a work in progress, recreating Redemption in Skyrim's Special Editions engine. For full disclosure, I am one of those people who simply stumbles into bugs and glitches, for better or for worse. You'll also be noticing a lot of clipping textures in this one. I tried a physics fix and that worked for exactly one play session. The physics just broke again and I'm not sure why. I tried patching things up for about a week and a half and I'm not keen on the idea of installing more mods on top of this one because it could further poison results. So I've done what I can. Some things might look as intended, but the Convent still practices witchcraft. I was asked to be quite critical of the mod, so that's what I'll do alongside speaking of positives. But given the wackiness of Skyrim in general, it's hard to ascertain sometimes whether something is genuinely an issue, or whether Skyrim is just being Skyrim. Keep in mind some things may be also chalked up to physics problems on my end, but a good chunk don't seem to be just me. Also, I've only played the original Skyrim release and not Special Edition. Lastly, check the description for timestamps. Reawakened starts with a condensed version of Vampire the Masquerade Redemption's original beginning. We jump straight into the journey with booting up this mod, while obviously not finished, at the Convent in Prague. Aneska and other nuns attempting to fend off two attacking Schlachta. You need to be careful here, because if you so much as graze any nun, you'll have to start all over. The NPCs will never stop attacking Kristoff. Sometimes the Schlachta spawn upstairs, I'm not sure what causes that. We then go through the tutorial via some text boxes. Afterward, we're essentially left to our own devices. The mines exist and it is marked as our main quest, but it isn't finished yet. Ghoul rats and Schlachta creatures roam the place. I can't say I've ever been vomit locked until I died in a mod before. Damaging effects stack at the moment. We'll just have to wait and see later in development what happens with that. For now, we have 7 main locations including the dev room to explore. There was one zone that I needed to be directed toward by the dev in order to view, but we'll get to that later. Overall the mod looks very pretty, as it is Skyrim's engine, but some sound effects need balancing, and it takes a long time to load on hard drive, spending anywhere from 5 to 20 seconds to load. It's moody, incredibly atmospheric, and it's evident that a lot of care is going into the project. It's quite admirable. Prague's old town looks nice and busy, and there are a number of custom cutscenes being implemented. Right now some are jarring as Kristoff will run around freely, suddenly start walking through a cutscene for about 6 seconds. The player then abruptly resumes control. Outdoor locations are shaping up fine. It seems you can still interact with wheat and moss hanging in the wild, besides the intended collectibles. Skyrimisms exist like people floating or stuck in the floor until you bump into them. The game is also naturally very dark sometimes, and increasing brightness makes many areas look exceedingly bloomed, so I'm not sure how to get a happy medium yet. Some cutscenes and NPC interactions crash Reawakened, even in the dev test area, which I'll show later. We can grab companions, with Wilhelm seemingly the most fleshed out, and we have the whole original gang hanging out in the same areas as Redemption. The player can assign abilities and give them items and weapons to use during excursions. The player can also unlock different abilities at havens as they go along. Each haven has a blood doll to feast on, and so do other certain key areas. Progressing to London, again it's quite atmospheric and the rain makes it feel like I'm really there. The underground train lets us travel from east to west London and vice versa, so long as we have $5. The bobbies are quite cartoonish though, with handcuffs on top of handcuffs. NPCs in London simply put their umbrella down in a static fashion when approached. There are werewolves in the park whose strength appears lore accurate. And we have Redemption characters like legally distinct Wilhelm, Lily that's not Lily, alongside Pink and Samuel hanging around in their designated zones. New York is beautifully snowy despite its less than glamorous nature here. A taxi driver can be interacted with to bring you elsewhere in New York, but that hasn't been completed yet. Apparently the devs contacted Paradox about what characters can be used in Reawakened, which means others will have separate identities. I'm not sure about Bandai Namco or otherwise, so who knows what will happen with the arcade machines and laptop screens. It is very easy to see beneath the glimmer through to blinding lights. This is Square One though, and it needs to be recognised. Hopefully pointing out issues will help the Redemption Reawaken progress. Certain things spoken about will already have been made aware to the devs. The old town has its fair share of issues. Inside St. Thomas's Cathedral, a woman eats holy bread by the loaves, and the Archbishop Giza drinks the blood of Christ until he's drunk. Crossing Judith Bridge, you are assaulted by a cacophony of noises. Please calm these down a bit. When opening certain doors, the gravity prevents Kristoff from escaping its pull unless jumping around and away from its influence. Inside the castle grounds, the soldiers were confused. One did not know how to stand or sit, constantly fidgeting. Another in Brant's court didn't understand how to sit at all. One consistently walked into a doorway, blocking the path. A blood slave acts incredibly racially insensitive, and 2 soldiers kneeled in the wrong direction of the very man they served. Unfortunately, Kristoff isn't impervious to bugs plaguing seats. The Old Town Haven bench has Kristoff sitting backwards through the wall instead. With little user effort, Kristoff will go out of bounds and fall out. The Jewish Quarter cutscene in the crypt after the golem, which currently cannot be killed, also crashes Reawakened. Some animals, like in other Old Town spots, suffer from looking very stiff, though the geese are also quite questionable. Pools of blood and ponds of water also have this oil slick-like reflective surface that looks completely unnatural. Characters are also stuck sitting in the floor or on air sometimes, but this seems more like a general Skyrim bug. The Vampire Monastery featuring the Cappadocian vampires isn't fully complete yet, but does lead up until the room where plenty of people quit Redemption. Mercurio, the first boss. There are plenty of skeletons, vampires and zombies here. The zombies don't stay dead forever and come back to life, and sometimes they explode. The way they reappear right now is phasing back into existence from behind or in front of your playable character, which feels a bit strange. Overall, for such a death-filled area, it looks quite pretty, and the mood fits. I didn't find any bugs off the bat here. That was until I started experimenting, and this is described later during my Elysium Issues. The Society of Leopold is not the best area to enter for a vampire who can't use guns yet, though we do wake up here regardless and need to break out at some point in the mod's progress. So far, it's all looking like the devs are trying to make it as faithful as possible to the original layout and design, much like everywhere else. I had a game-breaking bug here. If I frenzied almost immediately after dying in the Society of Leopold, my character came back to life somewhat, unable to move in some kind of out-of-bounds section of the cell. Loading a quick save broke the collision entirely. Attempting to use the TCL command did nothing in this situation. Rebooting the mod fixed this issue. On a more superficial glance, guns don't exactly gun in Reawakened as they shoot backward. Sometimes I have a hard time figuring out when a grenade has been thrown my way, as they still act like Skyrim magic. They're kind of invisible until impact. This can also happen in Ironworks. Upon leaving, we have a cutscene opening into London.
Is all my reason thrown down? Surely my sleep has made me mad. For if I am yet sane, then the world has become a lunatic asylum. Towers of glass loom over the tallest cathedral spire. Juggernauts of steel huddle through the streets of London. The cobbled Roman roads, which I once walked as a young crusader, are now fused into a single ribbon of black stone. And those roads are clogged with the night-walking Londoners, heedless of the dangers from the vampires among them. Are they so emboldened by the phantom torches which pierce the night and stab my eye? Surely my world has died, and all I love lies buried with it.
The London Haven Blood Doll also has some mismatched skin tones. Their face is black despite having white hands, similar to the Blood Slave issue in Brant's court. Lampposts lack collisions, so do vehicles, and among other things I possibly missed. The Setite Temple has a room set out of bounds, where a temple dedicated to the statue of Set is placed, holding the head of a pharaoh's corpse. While incomplete, you can see the direction devs are working on here. Entering the Lucky Clover and talking to the bartender crashes the mod when asking to see what he has for sale. I've only had him work once without COC commands so far. Maybe it was just pure chance. You can steal items from open windows in London and loot unwatched bags, which is a nice touch if you're hurting for money or blood. Nobody even in modern times seems to care what you do in front of them. Normally you would expect civilians and police officers to arrest you on theft charges, but that doesn't happen here. Nor does it happen at any point in the mod now that I think of it. The stop signs all say 50 km/h no matter where the player is stationed. It's funny to think of someone in-game trying to do that around a corner. Speaking of Ironworks earlier, it's a very glitchy area that I was asked to try out. By getting rid of Fire Gargoyle here, Reawakened may outright crash, but not always. The lighting suffers the same issues as other areas. The chimney smoke suffers from textures abruptly flickering. Lighting on the windows also appears broken. Ironworks also has some issues with an out of bounds section in the first downstairs area I could find, letting Kristoff fall out of bounds, and I needed to use console commands to get him back in. Enemy vampires feed from incredibly far away sometimes, meaning Kristoff will drop dead before the player can even understand what's happening, especially upstairs. Boxes lack collision, a large building does too, and that's reasonable this early into the mod's production. There's a very strange sound every time Kristoff gets hit while frenzying as well. New York has some stuff to look at in its snowy landscape, with the biker bar, gun shop, and vampire gangbangers to tackle. The hobos here look like something out of Fallout New Vegas with white Nikes. They look quite out of place even though it makes sense to try and dress up for the piles of snow falling down, with some shadows to avoid direct sunlight in place. White doors and upward pathways lack collision in New York, you'll wind up out of bounds. One of the officers here is desperate for a fire that doesn't exist. Finally, at least one NPC's neck doesn't connect to their torso. It would be good to see what's causing that. On the plus side, I found Kristoff's twin while wandering around. The issue and glitches section here is comprised of as many issues I found as possible. There were quite a few. Entering with what I am very critical about is about one of the most glaring issues in the mod. That is the enormous amount of bloom and general lighting glitches. It sometimes feels like an assault to the eyes. Business windows in London being the biggest offender, with street lights coming in second, including in New York. Snow in northern Rangstrasse is also very glowy, even with the physics fix in place. I was told EMB shaders are being investigated to try and rectify the glowing issue, and after some experimentation with time changing, snow works everywhere else in the mod except in northern Rangstrasse. Sometimes Reawakened will simply crash despite waiting out Skyrim loading issues, even upon boot, which has happened twice. Who knows what portion of that could be related to Reawakened, if at all, and what is to be chalked up to Skyrim shenanigans. The lack of collision by windows and elevators, doors and upward paths is hard to ignore. Sometimes this greatly hinders, like at the very start of the mod. I accidentally fell out of a window and died, needing to save Eneska again. One window has collision inside the convent, but floor textures there keep flickering. When visiting the Princess in London, sometimes you don't really feel like waiting on the realism of elevators to kick in, and want to warp back to the very start of the area and leave. Just walk through the lack of collision in the elevator and talk to the guy at the entrance. The elevator will still be going, so talking while the elevator is running will shake the room entirely during conversation. I like the idea of realism in many video games in a variety of ways, and this is Vampire the Masquerade after all. It has realism built in already with needing to blend into society, but sometimes lack of realism in our vampire games is better, at least in terms of elevator realism. Even in Bloodlines Club Asylum and Skyline Lofts, it feels like we move faster there than in this mod. Quickening the pace will be worthwhile considering. Speaking of visiting the princess, when going to the area to trigger this event, that was initially a long flat line of floating dirt covering the entire area just ahead of the driver you have to speak with first, it ceased existing upon rebooting. I figured out it's probably a memory leak somewhere. It happened again later during a playtest. The room next to the princess also has texture issues on the window, causing a blurred effect with a rectangle when looking at them from a specific distance. When walking around, the blur effect is more than obvious to the player. A random block room inside the dev test room showed up with collision when coming back from northern Rangstrasse. I'd been trying out some time changes, the game running for about 45 minutes at this point, and as expected, it disappeared after closing and rebooting the mod. This seems like something important to be investigated. There are also current issues with some cutscenes causing crashes, and one intended cutscene trigger with the mugger and modern day can bypass by COCing. Otherwise we get the true London experience by going down an alley and almost being mugged. If you come around the other way however, the guy's just standing there and doesn't really do anything. I didn't experiment attacking him to see if it would crash then and there, or during the necessary cutscene to get modern day clothing. Okay, I got curious and it actually crashes the game. If someone attacks you, you can't retaliate, or so I thought because the police just randomly started attacking me. Apparently you can retaliate and it doesn't matter. You can hide away with all these flashing little colours and eventually the authorities give up, but if you so much as nudge an umbrella out of somebody's hand, they'll start looking for you again. While being hunted, the screen flashes some alert colours. It doesn't look quite right. maybe some text on top of the screen could work. Rain effects against the glass are droplets that hit off the floor, and it looks kind of jarring when mixed with the PNG file texture of static rain against the glass. Sometimes glass in the cabinet beside Montague in the curio shop disappears when up close and at an angle, a wet pane of glass remains when trying to exit the curio shop too. Inside Club Tenebrae, dancers go through other dancers, Kmph and companions, and if Kmph is looking away and back at the dancers, they will simply jerk back into a dancing motion, so it looks quite funky. Despite being in Elysium on multiple occasions, there is only one area ruled by it that I couldn't attack, and that was inside Unorna's shop. I wasn't sure what prevented a player's full-scale slaughter compared to buildings elsewhere, but I think I may have figured out why later during playtesting. Though if you want to try and kill the vampires in Club Tenebrae, go ahead. You could wield weapons here in Redemption anyway. A similar issue rests in the curio shop. The word Masquerade pops on the top right of your screen, but you cannot whip out your sword or spell books walking in. It seems that COCing can break Elysium. Having a weapon pulled out in the Cappadocian Monastery and COCing to Unorna's shop meant that you could bypass Elysium restrictions. No pop-up appeared stating the location was Elysium. It also means that teleporting from Elysium into location where you should normally be able to attack act as though they are Elysium, and so forth until infinity. Doing the reverse fixes the bug. I'm also noticing that being able to use weapons and spells in general is sometimes taken away from me. Saving and reloading only solidifies the issue, and you'll have to reload an even earlier save. This seems to be a bug with Skyrim's engine and not the mod. I'm not sure how players fix this one, everyone has their own solution. You'll also stay dancing if you dance, enter first person mode, move, stop, and back out into third person view. There is a consistent need to feed in the Reawakened mod. My complaint is that in a battle system containing paralysis and stacking effects like stun-locking poisons, you are likely going to find players asking how to disable this feature, or others who simply punch in a health command to bypass these features. Delaying the time before your blood pool drops is at least encouraged. Obviously, the lower your blood pool, the higher your risk of frenzying, the state in which a vampire loses control over themselves. The lower your humanity, the risk of frenzying also increases, just like in Bloodlines. Frenzying results in a blood red screen and temporary transformation for Kmph. A lot of the time I can't make out what's happening during these events. Kmph might teleport closer to a potential target or back at the cell entrance. Any NPC is a target in this state, even his own companions. If there are no NPCs available, you will simply stand around, teleport closer to a companion while you may or may not attack them, or back to the cell entrance and wait out the frenzy timer. Afterward, Kmph needs a minute to come to after falling to the floor and resume from where he left off, left to deal with the consequences of his actions. At least the police are occasionally nice enough to give you some time to get up if they're around. Zooming out of first person mode's unique animations shows Kmph simply standing there, no animations playing, or still dancing despite not moving in first person. Sometimes the health bar will randomly disappear. You'll see aggravated damage hover around a blank area between vitae and stamina. As a human, you will also not see anything in the health bar spot. Rummaging through Kmpf's and NPC's inventory sometimes has outfits and weapons laying horizontal rather than being vertical, so you'll have to click and drag these items to understand what they look like. For now, a lot of these use default placeholders. When acquiring vampire abilities, the icon showing the change in player status shakes around while moving. To point something out, at least one spell is very out of place, and one of them is Firebolt Scroll. It restores health in this mod at the moment, and I'm sure you can tell why it's pretty nonsensical to have it heal the player character. Another is Feyblood that has the Church of Satan's Baphomet sigil on it. Fey are fairies and includes changelings by extension. I guess Feyblood is difficult to make look evil. It also doesn't drive our character mad when drinking it just yet. I expect this to change later during development. The text in general can either overlap or look squeezed together when numbers and letters enter the mix. Sometimes text and numbers disappear underneath others. Also, food as an inventory choice will sometimes pop up before disappearing again if food was in the player's inventory. This may be another Skyrimism. Kmph can visit vampire havens in each available location, and is able to interact with some unique companion characters inside. Sometimes it doesn't work right away and you have to quick save and quick load in order to interact with them. I'm not sure why yet, but it's a known issue. In any case, you can take some as party members, who can lend a hand during battle. You can use a shrine inside havens to give your new friends vampire abilities, and even play as them by using the Z key. I've had this break, especially in hallways. The camera is trapped in place, meanwhile your character is moving around. You'll need to try and focus back on the party member to try and break out of these camera problems as another playable character. Sometimes the glitch happens and you simultaneously control Kmph and another playable character. Despite Vampire's abilities being broken, I found that the same issues plague Protean. The The camera is stuck in place, yet the player can still move around. The issues appear linked at least on the surface. These recruitable companions can also enter torpor in the middle of a fight, like in Redemption. The state of vampire enters near death, and you'll need to revive them again at your haven. I couldn't get this to work though, so it either has outstanding bugs or it hasn't been implemented yet. You can also still switch your sight to companions in torpor, but will be unable to move. Your new friends will also stop following you at a certain point in Bohemian outskirts due to an invisible wall for some reason. Kmph can also give his party members new abilities and change them, like assigning celerity and other clan available options. If you back out of the option screen without selecting anything, you will lose an entire ability slot. I was told that this will be fixed in the future. Companions do get in the way when trying to walk around, particularly in small places. They should back away, but sometimes this might break and party members stare at Kmph blankly, especially with more than one party member, preventing Kmph from getting around easily. Just back up and try to make space between you and your party. While attacking enemies, your companions can pick up weapons and use them, as well as vampiric abilities to tip the scales in your favour. Companion abilities were also available in inventory to store in the dev test room. A whole 11 of aggressive stance in personal experience. The playable character also tries to consume one upon left click. I'm not sure what causes that. Gameplay is just Skyrim, about 99.9% of the population knows what that entails. Just in case you never played Skyrim, it just means hovering in and out of enemy reach with the sword if possible, hide and take pot shots with a bow and arrow, or cast offensive magic spells and take the enemies down. There are grenades as mentioned, which I was asked to try out. Grenades do work, though animations lack any grenade and are stiff. Recovery time can be a little slow, as is Skyrimism, so you're vulnerable to incoming attacks, both mundane and magical. The player can generally be eaten alive by the second they're on their feet. And it essentially works like a fireball projectile that either jumps straight out towards the enemy, or jankily lands somewhere maybe near an enemy while pressing and holding left mouse button to throw. If a grenade lands on Kmph, he cinematically falls down on the ground and needs a minute to stand back up. That means you could potentially take a pummeling while the playable character regains his air footing. Either grenades or one specific NPC that gets spawned can potentially crash the mod in the central dev test room. Right now only NPCs can be shown using guns. The dev apparently will be making it known which mod to include when making use of Reawakened. I'd rather use those over grenades any day of the week. It just feels a little too delayed against enemy gunfire. I look forward for a separate gun mod to be officially added. It's essentially still Skyrim battling. I'm not sure you can do a lot to make it feel different. When it comes to weapons in general, you won't be able to use certain options until you level up enough to use them. The mod currently eats weapons if your skill level isn't up to scratch. If your weapon disappears while under-leveled, I've been told that they return once you meet the requirements. Otherwise, you have reskinned bows and arrows, grenades as aforementioned, different types of swords, and more. Some weapons and other items will carry an unidentified marker. Those need a specific spell in order to find out more information on what they are and what they can do. The Taser I was asked to test out and works okay. It just makes enemies go stiff and fall over in both environments I've tried it in, being the test cell and Ironworks. Molotovs currently have an issue where if they explode on a wall, it can double and appear on the floor, setting that on fire. There are also a range of new weapons and attire to choose from in both ancient times and modern choices. I also noticed that using the Odious Chalice sometimes resulted in doubling the item. Enemies are also randomized in their attacks, so you'll experience different stacking of effects, including but not limited to poison, paralysis, dissolve flesh, and so on. There are a lot of typos in Reawakened so far. They're in the menu items and abilities. It also bleeds into spoken dialogue. In the skills menu, you'll be able to view Kmpf's abilities and what they do. The skill tree exists and currently has abilities for every clan, not just Bruja or Bruja, which Kmph is supposed to be. I'm not sure when this will change in later mod updates. As of right now, upgrades can only be placed in armor, attributes, weapons, archery, sneak, and speech. I was told vampire abilities are still broken in the skill tree. As mentioned, only certain skill tree branches are available as of recording. Saving and loading from the main menu is bugged. The dev informed me of this problem after encountering it. Exiting the save load menu and re-entering it fixed the problem for me. Mileage may vary, however. You'll also need to save reload when trying to interact with potential companions, as it's a known bug as well. Outside of bugs, other glitches, and the severe lighting, I argued that there's too much smoke or fog in places. The New York Haven's fog along the ground feels very unfit for the area as an example. Beneath every light source inside the biker shop, there's smoke and it's only there. Dialing it back would make things just look a little more natural. The atmosphere overall is nice in most cases, there's just something missing and I can't quite put my finger on it yet. And the modern flair is effective when factoring out some placeholders. Right now things still feel too default Skyrim as is to be expected. We'll see what happens as work progresses. Shadows during the day were mentioned as a method of allowing vampires to travel. In Redemption there was an interesting trial in ancient times of meandering companions around the touch of sunlight. It will be interesting to see how this is managed for movement in Skyrim's engine, which obviously has its own problems. The hand-placed light sources will be nice to see in its completed phase. There is a bit of a design choice I disagree with, and that's the water effects being used as smoke. It's atmospheric, but it looks incredibly strange. The music in this mod as of recording is a mixture between the original OST and what sounds like some royalty-free placeholders, including trap music. As it stands, the temporary tracks don't really suit the mod, but what can I say about the music for New York other than... Reawakened does feature some voice acting. There will be more in the future given NPC voices and companions. It's bare bones at the minute with lines needing some further treatment. They also need a significant audio boost. They can be barely heard over the soundtrack. I can't comment on much else as everything is in its infancy here. Ultimately, this was an interesting experience, and I definitely enjoyed it even if it was for reasons unintended. Every time I booted up the playtest I was finding new bugs and different little things to pick at. It's definitely still at square one being a pre-alpha release. Outside of bugs and glitches, this appears to be a potentially decent mod, and I would honestly like it to be. The team is evidently quite passionate about the project, with the Reawakened mod set to release in about another 8 years or so. Hopefully this offers some look into what one player's couple of test runs has been like. It's been a lot of ups and downs. I doubt many people will encounter the exact problems I had. As stated, I have a tendency to find these things. And that would be the end of the video. If you liked it, subscribing and leaving a comment always helps, but isn't expected. Here's hoping you have a good start to the year 2025. I'll see you around.